Like my colleague John to my right, I began as a school teacher. I taught grades 6, 7, and 8. And I taught English language arts in the US. And one of the things I noticed as a new teacher was that there was considerable talk about being mindful, being critical of the technologies that we were using. And in spite of this talk about it, I saw very little walk, meaning very little action being done in the classroom, so that the talk did not match the walk. And as I became a parent some years later, I became concerned about this. I sort of selfishly wanted to make sure my kids had a kind of awareness, a kind of mindset that was critical, that they were aware, that the technologies themselves had a kind of orientation in them and how they would provide information, how they would shape experience. So what I'd like to share with you is some work that colleagues and I are doing to help shape this kind of awareness, this kind of critique, if you will, how to create a kind of critical mindset, and not just a mindset, but a culture among the kids that we work with in classrooms. So I have a really practical orientation. And this all started with my children. When they entered grade 2, when I would drop them off at school every day, I would say to them, ask your teachers a challenging question today. They were doing a lot of acquiring of knowledge, excuse me, but I wanted them to begin to push back a little bit and ask questions like, is that right? Or is there another way to look at this? I wanted that voice in their head, that kind of challenging. Years later, here they are a little bit older, my wife and I would ask them a similar kind of question around the dinner table every day. And that is, what idea did you challenge today when you were in school? Were you just accepting of everything, or did you provide that kind of pushback or that critique to what was being said and done? Again, we wanted to continue this voice in their head that it's okay to do this, that this is a useful and productive thing. And it's not being disrespectful, it's being honest. It's being directly honest. So this idea of challenge really became a kind of fundamental and focus point for thinking about how do you develop a critical mindset? How do you think critically? And I've become more interested in this generally. Like, what's the status of critical thinking worldwide? What kind of data do we have? And there's a pattern if you look at the data, worldwide but country by country. I want to share this just briefly. And this pattern is pervasive. It's fairly consistent. And I'll talk a little bit about my own country, just a couple of findings from the data. That kids in the US are aware of critical thinking and what it is, but they're not using it. Not on a wide scale. They use it in school when they're prompted to do so, but when they get out in the real world and they're using devices, they don't have that kind of challenge or critique in mind. The other is observational. This comes from a number of studies that the teaching that's occurring in American classrooms doesn't really cultivate a kind of critical thinking that transfers, that goes out into the life and into work and into the world. And I'm really concerned about this for my kids and for all kids. I've also looked at the data that's available for Turkey. When it comes to the curriculum, some real interesting studies that critical thinking is mentioned as a goal, but there are few objectives when it comes to looking at the lessons. When you look at instruction, broadly based in Turkey, the teaching rarely uses ICTs in a way that promotes and develops and cultivates critical thought. And when it comes to student learning, when we look at the international assessments, the OECD average is really below. It's really below the the OECD average. And I think one of the most jumping out points in the data is just the actual utilization of critical thought. And the latest PISA assessment, working with 15-year-olds, a large portion of the students, when prompted to carry out a critical thinking task using digital tools, were completely lost. Didn't even know how to start and then where to go from there. So I shared these two countries, these two data points, to say that this is a pattern that's worldwide, that we need to do something. And so I've really committed myself and the colleagues I work with to thinking about what can be done, what can we do that would help facilitate, what would help cultivate a mindset of critique. So I have a couple of examples. I want to show you what we're doing. We're developing a set of tasks that can be used across the grades and across the curriculum. And I'm going to show you just one category of tasks. This is an awareness task. How do we really help people understand how the algorithms of AI work and influence what we experience when we're online? We call these algorithmic awareness tasks. And the first example I want to show you occurs in search. So if you can imagine 3 third graders sitting at desks, and they have in front of them 3 tablets. They're going to carry out this task. On each tablet, there's a different search engine. We have Google, Bing, and Yandex here. What the students will do is type in the same question in each search engine. And so one question we've used is simply, how tall is this mountain? This is Mount Hood. And when I was a school teacher, I taught right next to Mount Hood. And so you'd think this is a factual question. We're just looking at how tall is a mountain. We can measure it. And this is a picture of the mountain. Okay? We have powerful instruments that can measure how tall it is. So what do you think Google says? What do you think that Google's algorithms say the height of the mountain is? Okay? This is the number it puts forward in these third graders' search. What do you think Bing says? Does it give the same number? No, it gives a different number. So how can this be? How can algorithms in the background work and provide a different answer to what we would see as a factual question? And when we go to Yandex, what does it result in? Yet another answer. We could do this with other search tools, and we would come up with other numbers. Okay? These numbers are not widely varying, but they indicate that different sources, different kinds of information are being drawn upon to produce a result. One other quick illustration. When we use AI chatbots, you can imagine, in this case, some 7th graders, 3 of them working together at a table, and they have in front of them 3 laptops. And on those laptops are 3 AI tools. They have Google Bard, AI chatbot, and Bing's chat. And we prompt the kids also to insert the same question in each of these AI tools. And in this case, the question is, what's the best generative AI chatbot? Right. Now, you can probably anticipate what each of them is going to say. So, what does Google Bard say? Trying to get it to advance here. Okay. It says that it is the best chatbot. Okay? Maybe not to be unexpected. What does ChatGPT say? It says that it is the best generative AI chatbot. And what's curious here is it says ChatGPT 3 is the better one. even though 4 is the more current and has a larger database. Let's figure that one out. And of course, our third Bing chat says that it is the best generative AI chatbot. So again, this helps develop a kind of algorithmic awareness that when I sit down at a computer and start using these tools, my mindset has to be skeptical. I have to be aware and alert that there's a kind of machine bias, a machine orientation that's going to take me certain directions and affect my learning experience. So my time is up.
Thank you.
And I just want to conclude with this thought. We challenge kids with a kind of image, and we ask them, are you somebody's puppet? Are these tools manipulating and guiding you in ways that you're not aware of? And we want them to leave with this in mind so that going forward, they're aware. They have this kind of algorithmic awareness in mind.
Thank you, Professor. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'd like to tell you just briefly, building on my colleagues' comments, about a project that's happening right now in Turkey. It's happening in Ankara, and it's working with doctoral students at Gazi University. And it's using AI in effective and ethical ways to do one of the most challenging parts of research, and that is writing the literature review. Some interesting work has shown that while collecting the data and analyzing it all have their challenges, putting together an argument, a compelling argument in a literature review is probably the most challenging part of carrying out research work. And so as my colleagues have talked about writing, the various ways in which AI tools could be used, we're doing a pilot project supported by Tubitalk to take a look at what are the tools and how can those tools be used. And with my good colleague, Professor Dr. Hayati Akyol, who's here in the audience, we're working with a team of colleagues to think about this. How do you identify quality, significant research questions using AI tools? Not factual questions like I posed earlier, but deep, profound questions about education and other disciplines and fields. How do you then locate literature that's relevant given all the studies that are published every month across the world? How do you find studies that actually exist? Because there's some evidence that hallucinating, creating fake studies is a common thing that occurs with the current AI tools we have. And then thirdly, how do we analyze those studies in a way that is more than just listing a bunch of studies in a literature review, but forms an argument, and an argument that's compelling and leads to the point where we say, the study I'm going to do is really important for these reasons. So there's more to that story than what I have time to share here. I'd be glad to talk later about that. But right here today, there's work being done at the graduate level, thinking about how these tools can really be instrumental in ways that will be ethical, but as well effective.
Thank you, sir. Very nice. This is, I think Gazi University is very lucky to have you in there in this project. Thank you for coming here. Professor Hartman, it's your turn.
I confess that I was a little bit intimidated when you said that we should summarize the totality of our ideas.
Yeah.
And so I quickly pulled out my computer and sought some assistance. And so I typed into ChatGPT-4, what is the, summarize the totality of Douglas K. Hartman's ideas. And I've written a fair amount over the last couple of decades, and so I wanted to know what it said about my ideas. And the top idea is that be mindful of the implementation gap. that there's a gap between what we think we want to do or we're doing and what actually happens. And we see this in the policy world often. We develop a policy, and then there's a gap between the ideal of that policy and what actually happens in a classroom with kids, day in, day out. And so this idea of an implementation gap is, I guess, the totality of the work I've been doing, is to think about how can we close that gap? How can we create tasks that are student initiated, that are experience oriented, that really move kids in directions that we think are of value, or that they think are of value. We have an expression in English that's used sometimes to describe this. We say the devil is in the details. And that simply means that we have high things we want to do, but when we get down to actually doing them, they're much more complicated and sophisticated and difficult to do. And so I think that would be the message taken away today, that as you walk out these doors later today, that you make a commitment. You say that I'm going to really work on the details of this. Because while we're virtuous and have ideas that we think we can hold and act in practice, it's much more challenging to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.